What happens when experienced hikers vanish without a trace, only to be found buried beneath their own campsite? This is the story of three friends whose weekend adventure became one of the most baffling cold cases in North Carolina's history. A mystery that continues to haunt investigators and serves as a chilling reminder that some secrets never leave the forest. The October morning mist clung to the mountains of Pisgah National Forest like a whispered promise of adventure. Mark Sullivan adjusted his weathered backpack one final time as he waited outside the ranger station, his breath visible in the crisp mountain air. At 34, he had been hiking these trails since he was a teenager, and the familiar weight of his gear felt like coming home. "You're early," Jenna Martinez called out as she approached, her hiking boots crunching on the gravel parking lot. Despite being the youngest of their group at 28, she had logged more trail miles than most seasoned guides. Her infectious laugh had carried them through countless camping trips over the past 5 years. Kevin Thompson arrived moments later, slightly out of breath, but grinning widely. Sorry, had to stop for more coffee," he said, holding up a thermos. "You know I can't function without my caffeine fix." At 31, Kevin was the methodical one of the group, always triple-checking their supplies and route plans. The three friends had been planning this particular trip for months. They were going to tackle a remote section of the forest, far from the popular tourist trails, where they could enjoy the solitude that only true wilderness could provide. Their chosen campsite sat in a secluded valley, accessible only by a challenging 6-mile hike through dense woodland. "Everyone ready for the best weekend of the year?" Mark asked, shouldering his pack. "Always," Jenna replied, her eyes bright with anticipation. They set off down the trail as the sun climbed higher, their voices gradually fading into the vast silence of the forest. Ranger Tom Mitchell had been patrolling these woods for 15 years, but something felt wrong the moment he crested the ridge overlooking the valley. Where he expected to see the pristine wilderness he knew so well, a thin column of smoke rose from below. His heart sank. Campers who didn't properly extinguish their fires were a constant concern, especially during the dry season. As he made his way down the steep trail, Mitchell's unease grew. The smoke was coming from what appeared to be an active campfire, but he could see no tent, no people, no camping equipment of any kind. Just a small fire burning alone in a clearing, sending its lonely signal into the afternoon sky. "Hello," he called out as he approached. "Anyone here?" The only response was the crackling of flames and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Mitchell examined the scene carefully. The fire had been burning for some time. The surrounding rocks were blackened, and a substantial pile of ash had accumulated in the center. But everything else that should have accompanied a campsite was simply gone. No tent stakes in the ground, no food containers, no backpacks. Even the typical signs of human presence, flattened areas where people had slept, disturbed vegetation, were absent. He radioed back to headquarters, describing the abandoned fire and requesting a search team. Something about the scene didn't sit right with him, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what it was. The search began that afternoon and continued for 3 days. Teams combed the surrounding area, following every trail and stream, checking every ravine and rocky outcrop. They found nothing. No signs of distress, no dropped equipment, no indication that anyone had been in the area at all, save for that mysterious fire. The case might have been written off as a false alarm, perhaps the remnant of an unauthorized camping trip, if not for the missing persons report that came in 2 days later. Mark's sister, Sarah, had been expecting a call Sunday evening. Her brother was meticulous about checking in after his hiking trips, and when Monday morning came and went without word, She knew something was terribly wrong. They were supposed to be back by Sunday night, she told Detective Lisa Chen, her voice tight with worry. Mark always calls. Always. And their phones are going straight to voicemail. Detective Chen took down the details. 3 experienced hikers, last seen Friday morning heading into Pisgah National Forest. Their planned route would have taken them to the same area where Ranger Mitchell had discovered the abandoned campfire. The connection was made immediately, and the search effort intensified. Search and rescue teams, volunteer groups, and tracking dogs scoured the forest for any sign of Mark, Jenna, and Kevin. The abandoned campfire site became the focal point of the investigation, but despite days of searching, they found nothing. It's like they just vanished into thin air, Ranger Mitchell told Detective Chen as they stood at the site where the fire had burned. In all my years out here, I've never seen anything like it. The search continued for 2 weeks before being officially called off. The families held on to hope, believing that their loved ones had somehow gotten lost and would eventually find their way out. Missing person flyers were posted throughout the area, and the case remained active, but with no new leads, it gradually faded from public attention. The forest kept its secrets, and autumn turned to winter in the mountains. Spring came early to Pisgah National Forest that year, and with it, Ranger Mitchell found himself drawn back to the site of the mysterious campfire. He couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was professional curiosity, or maybe something deeper, but he felt compelled to check the area periodically. On this particular morning in late March, he wasn't alone. His partner, a German shepherd named Rex, had been acting strangely since they'd arrived at the clearing. The dog kept returning to a spot near where the fire had burned, whining and pawing at the ground. "What is it, boy?" Mitchell asked, kneeling beside the agitated animal. "What do you smell?" Rex began digging frantically, his powerful claws sending dirt flying. Mitchell watched for a moment, then felt his blood run cold as something pale appeared in the freshly turned earth. It was a human hand. Mitchell immediately called for backup and began the grim process of cordoning off what had suddenly become a crime scene. Within hours, the quiet clearing was bustling with investigators, forensic specialists, and the county coroner. The excavation was methodical and heartbreaking. 3 bodies were discovered, buried in a shallow grave directly beneath where their campsite would have been. The victims were identified through dental records as Mark Sullivan, Jenna Martinez, and Kevin Thompson. But the condition of the bodies told a story more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Detective Chen had worked homicide cases for 12 years, but the Pisgah 3 case presented challenges unlike any she had encountered before. The forensic evidence painted a picture of calculated brutality that chilled even seasoned investigators. Mark and Kevin had been bound with their own shoelaces, their hands tied behind their backs. The condition of their fingers told a horrific story. Each digit had been systematically broken, the injuries inflicted with what appeared to be methodical precision. The coroner estimated that this torture had continued for some time before they were finally killed by blunt force trauma to their heads. Jenna's injuries were different, but no less disturbing. She had been killed quickly, a single devastating blow to the skull, but her fingers remained intact. The disparity in treatment suggested that the killer had made a deliberate choice about each victim's fate. The level of control required for this kind of crime, Dr. Patricia Reeves, the forensic pathologist, explained to Detective Chen, suggests someone with either medical knowledge or extensive experience with this sort of thing. Perhaps most puzzling was what was missing from the scene. All 3 victims' hiking boots had been removed and were nowhere to be found. Their tent, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, and food supplies had vanished completely. Even more strangely, there was no physical evidence linking anyone else to the crime. No foreign DNA, no fingerprints, no tool marks that could be traced to a specific weapon. "It's like a ghost committed these murders," Chen told her partner, Detective Mike Rodriguez. "Whoever did this knew exactly how to avoid leaving evidence behind." The investigation expanded to include anyone who might have known about the trio's hiking plans. Family members, co-workers, and fellow hiking enthusiasts were all interviewed. Background checks revealed no enemies, no debts, no romantic entanglements that might have provided a motive for murder. Mark worked as an accountant for a small firm in Asheville. Jenna was a veterinary technician beloved by her clients and colleagues. Kevin taught high school mathematics and coached the cross-country team. None of them had any connection to criminal activity or dangerous associations. "These were just 3 friends who loved hiking," Rodriguez observed. "Why would someone do this to them?" As months passed, the investigation began to stall. Every lead seemed to evaporate upon closer examination. The killer had been extraordinarily careful, leaving behind a crime scene that was both brutal and sterile. Detective Chen consulted with FBI profilers, hoping to gain insight into the type of person capable of such methodical violence. The profile they developed was troubling. Likely a white male between 30 and 50 years old, with possible military or medical training, familiar with the area, and possessing significant experience in evading detection. The ritualistic nature of the finger-breaking suggests this may not have been his first time, Special Agent Sarah Hoffman explained during a case review meeting. The precision, the patience required, these point to someone who has refined his technique over time. The possibility that the Pisgah 3 weren't the killer's first victims led to a review of unsolved cases throughout the region. Several missing person cases from other national forests shared similar characteristics, experienced outdoors enthusiasts who had vanished without a trace, but none had been found, making it impossible to determine if there was a connection. The stolen camping equipment presented another puzzle. Why take the tent, sleeping bags, and cooking supplies? Were they trophies, or had they been taken to prevent identification? The missing hiking boots were particularly baffling. No similar items had appeared in pawn shops or online marketplaces, suggesting they had been disposed of or kept as personal mementos. Local hiking communities were interviewed extensively. Trail registers were examined for any names that appeared frequently around the times of various disappearances. Security cameras at trailheads and park entrances were reviewed, but the remote location of the crime meant that most of the relevant areas had no surveillance coverage. As the first anniversary of the murders approached, Detective Chen found herself no closer to an arrest than she had been the day the bodies were discovered. The murders cast a long shadow over the hiking community in western North Carolina. Trail forums buzzed with theories and speculation. Some hikers began traveling in larger groups or avoiding remote areas altogether. The Pisgah National Forest, once considered a sanctuary for outdoor enthusiasts, had become a place tinged with fear. "It changes how you look at every person you meet on the trail," said Amanda Phillips, a member of the Asheville Hiking Club who had known all 3 victims. "You wonder if that friendly person who says hello might be capable of something terrible." The families of the victims struggled with their grief while living with the knowledge that their loved one's killer remained free. Sarah Sullivan, Mark's sister, became an advocate for improved safety measures in national forests and worked tirelessly to keep the case in the public eye. "Someone out there knows something," she said during a televised appeal on the 1-year anniversary of the murders. "These were good people who deserved better than this. They deserve justice." Anonymous tip lines yielded hundreds of calls, most of which led nowhere. Psychics offered their services, conspiracy theorists proposed elaborate scenarios, and amateur detectives shared their theories online. But concrete evidence remained elusive. The case began to attract national attention when true crime podcasters and television shows featured the story. The mystery of the Pisgah 3 became a touchstone for discussions about safety in the wilderness and the vulnerability of even experienced outdoors enthusiasts to predatory violence. 3 years after the murders, Detective Chen was promoted to lieutenant, but she never closed the Pisgah 3 file. The case haunted her, representing both a professional failure and a personal obsession. She continued to review the evidence periodically, hoping that time might reveal something previously overlooked. New forensic techniques were applied to old evidence as they became available. DNA analysis was repeated with more sensitive equipment. Digital forensics experts examined the victims' phones and computers for any detail that might have been missed, but the killer's careful work remained impenetrable. Other cases in the region were examined through the lens of the Pisgah murders. A pattern seemed to emerge: experienced hikers disappearing from remote locations, often with their equipment vanishing along with them. But without bodies or crime scenes, it was impossible to confirm whether these cases were related. The National Park Service and Forest Service implemented new safety protocols, including improved communication systems for backcountry areas and more frequent ranger patrols. While these measures provided some comfort to the hiking community, they couldn't erase the knowledge that someone capable of such calculated violence might still be active. Ranger Mitchell, now approaching retirement, continued to patrol the area where the bodies had been found. He reported an ongoing unease when visiting the site, as if the forest itself retained the memory of what had happened there. "The place feels different now," he told a reporter. "It's like there's a darkness that won't lift." 5 years after Mark, Jenna, and Kevin were found buried beneath their own campsite, their case officially joined the ranks of unsolved murders that plague law enforcement agencies across the country. The file remained open, but active investigation had ceased. Detective Chen, now Lieutenant Chen, kept the case photos in her desk drawer. Occasionally, she would pull them out and study the crime scene images, hoping that fresh eyes might reveal some previously overlooked detail. The methodical nature of the crimes continued to suggest that this was not a random act of violence, but without any connection between the victims and a potential perpetrator, the investigation had nowhere to go. The forensic evidence painted a clear picture of what had happened, but provided no clues about who had done it. The killer had been careful to avoid leaving any trace of his identity, while simultaneously creating a crime scene that spoke to deep psychological pathology. "In 30 years of police work, I've never seen anything quite like it," retired FBI profiler Dr. Marcus Thompson, no relation to victim Kevin Thompson, observed during a case review. The combination of extreme violence and meticulous evidence management suggests someone with both profound psychological disturbance and sophisticated knowledge of forensic investigation techniques. The case files filled 3 large boxes, documenting thousands of hours of investigative work that had yielded no arrests. Tips continued to trickle in sporadically, usually following media coverage of the anniversary or true crime exposés, but none had provided actionable leads. The families of the victims found different ways to cope with the unresolved nature of their loss. Some, like Sarah Sullivan, channeled their grief into advocacy work. Others withdrew from public attention, preferring to mourn privately. All carried the additional burden of knowing that their loved one's killer remained free, possibly to strike again. Today, hikers still visit Pisgah National Forest, drawn by its natural beauty and the promise of solitude in the wilderness. Most are unaware of the tragedy that occurred in a remote valley, where three friends seeking adventure found only terror and death. The case of the Pisgah 3 remains a stark reminder that evil can exist even in the most beautiful and seemingly peaceful places. The methodical nature of the crimes, the complete absence of forensic evidence, and the ritualistic elements of the violence suggest a perpetrator who may have struck before and could strike again. Law enforcement agencies continue to receive training in wilderness crime scene investigation, partially as a result of lessons learned from this case. New technologies are applied to old evidence as they become available, but the passage of time makes resolution increasingly unlikely. The questions that haunted the original investigation remain unanswered. Who was capable of such calculated brutality? How did they select their victims? What was the significance of the finger breaking and the theft of specific items? Most troubling of all, are there other victims whose bodies have never been found? The forest keeps its secrets, and somewhere in the shadows between the trees, the truth about what happened to Mark Sullivan, Jenna Martinez, and Kevin Thompson waits to be discovered. Until that day comes, their case stands as a grim warning about the hidden dangers that can lurk in even the most pristine wilderness. Their story serves as a reminder that when we venture into the wild places of the world, we carry with us not only our hopes for adventure and connection with nature, but also our vulnerability to the darkest aspects of human nature. In seeking solitude, we sometimes find more than we bargained for. The Pisgah 3 went into the forest seeking peace and found instead a horror that continues to echo through the mountains, a mystery that remains unsolved, and a warning that some questions may never find their answers. The investigation into the murders of Mark Sullivan, Jenna Martinez, and Kevin Thompson remains open. Anyone with information about this case is encouraged to contact the Henderson County Sheriff's Department